how does Europe get out of this mess? I mean, and to what extent can we learn from how Greece got out of its mess?
Well, let me just first say about tariffs. I'm sorry to tell you, I think they're coming, and coming big. Again, I can't read into the man's mind, but he campaigned on that. Maybe he exaggerated, but it was his biggest campaign promise in a way, and he said it again and again, I think, very hard, and he seems to believe it. And
he believes something very weird about it, though, doesn't it? He thinks China pays the tariffs on Chinese goods, which just isn't true. They're a sales tax on American consumers.
I mean, you said what he believes as opposed to what he says. I don't know what he believes. Of course, it's a tax on U.S. consumers. And I want to say clearly, when the U.S. puts on tariffs, it's worse for the U.S. than anyone else. India and Brazil have very high tariffs on everything. How's that worked out for them?
And it clobbers their exports too.
No, but look, the fact that it's not logical, he's very insistent upon that, so I'm worried it's going to happen.
So do you talk to people in his circle who are trying to, because occasionally you get the sense that the people around him are saying, look, we know you need to do something with the tariffs, but you can't do these blanket tariffs, do the targeted tariffs you did in your first term, or do something that isn't this sort of, over-the-top version of tariffs. And then he says, no, I want to do the whole thing. I mean, are there people around him trying to steer him towards at least a less damaging tariff policy?
My impression is that in Trump, too, if you want to be in the administration and you say to him, Mr. President, 98% of your policies I just really agree with, but they're just 2%. Can you give me that 2% I don't agree with? You're out.
Yeah.
I just don't see anyone pushing back on this at the moment. I mean, maybe after they're launched, there'll be,
So what's the scenario there? So the only way he will learn about what tariffs actually do is if he tries them, and then that risks lower growth, higher inflation, and so on. Do you think that's the world we're heading to, where he only learns by actually trying it?
You're asked, this is someone who, I don't know how he learns, and so I can't answer that question, but I mean, there's going to be a mix of policies. So the deregulation, Biden had increased a lot of regulation, that's right. Pro-growth. I think we're looking at a boom-bust cycle, really. This is someone, he's going to deregulate everything, and that's going to lead to growth, even with the tariffs. I think what's going to happen in the Trump economy is he's taking an economy that he says is terrible, worst economy ever. I mean, it looks pretty good to me in some ways. The immigration was terrible, deficits are too much. But it's an overheated economy, and he's going to overheat it some more. How does that end? It ends with either inflation's going to go way up, or the Fed's going to raise interest rates a lot, and that's going to be they're high already, that's going to be very difficult for the Fed to do. So I see a recession in the second half of his term, and if I want to make a crazy prediction, but I'm going to make it, I think we're going to see price controls in the second half of Trump's term. He's going to see inflation going up. He's an authoritarian.
Walmart, by law, change the price of that bacon.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's happened before in many places. It doesn't work, but it works for a while. And that's where I think we're going.
Are you worried about the independence of the Fed as well?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the independence of the Fed is not sacrosanct. And again, both parties don't like the independence of the Fed. I have many friends who are progressives who work, on what should be the future of central banking, who want it to be the Fed to be the people's bank, making the people's loans. I don't get into that. But one of the things about Trump is he does things that other people are thinking, but he does them in this very crude way. So absolutely, the Fed isn't independent the way the ECB is. If Congress cooperated, you could get rid of the Fed, bring it back into the Treasury in a week.
Right.
And there are a lot of other things.
So he could order them to not raise interest rates.
He can put pressure on them that makes it difficult. And they may present some language. I mean, Biden did that. That's how this happened, that we got the inflation. Normally, we reappoint the chair of the Fed in the early summer. He waited till the end of the year. Why? So that he wouldn't raise interest rates. The second Powell got reappointed, he raised interest rates. That's a small example of pressure. So I think we'll get some mix of jawboning, pressure, and these authoritarian, out-of-the-box policies that don't work. But we said the same thing about tariffs. We said, don't do tariffs. Economists think you shouldn't do tariffs. And he'll say, they said I shouldn't do tariffs. They're beautiful, whatever they do. They said we shouldn't do price controls. All of these elites, they're wrong. Let's keep the prices low for everybody.
Okay, I'd like to go back to Europe, though, because we're going to have to deal with this in Europe. So potentially these tariffs, maybe retaliatory tariffs, slower growth, harder to balance the budgets, inflationary pressures. What do? We have to look at more serious policy reform, right?
Well, we've got the Draghi report, which is really well done. I heard the Draghi report mentioned about 100 times when I was at the World Economic Forum. It's kind of optimistic of how easily you can get there, what it will cost.
What are the big policies that you think should, if you had to pull one lever, what would it be?
Actually, you may not want to hear this, but if I had to pull one lever, I would give the UK a Norway-type trade agreement. The UK is hurting, Europe's hurting. I know the French want to punish them the maximum possible. That would be a very good thing to do.
That would help Europe overall? I thought you were going to say labour market reform or common defence procurement.
You wanted to give me one thing. Certainly Europe does have to deal with defence. That's something, that's not a recommendation, that's a necessity. But I mean, after that, it's clearly energy policy reform. You have to figure out how to make energy policy competitive. You can't compete in anything if you have energy prices that are 3 and 4 times the rest of the world. And
even higher in Britain, by the way.
And even higher, I'm even higher in Britain, by the way. So, Rachel Reeves, she's the chancellor in the UK. I've actually known her for a very, very long time. It's very sensibly said, let's have less regulations. Now, she's not very popular in the UK right now, as you know, particularly among the elite because of all the taxes she's put on. But, I think that was very sensible. I mean, the old saying we've all heard 100 times, but it bears saying again, is the US innovates, China imitates, Europe regulates. And that's just not going to work going forward. Okay,
Angeliki Frangou, I'd like to come back to you on this. Are there regulations, you mentioned regulation as well, and how Europe has sort of maybe gone too far. Are there specific things you would like to see change that would help you and help your customers?
We are a global business, so we are not only in Europe. But as a European, I will say, the last 10 years has not been pleasant. I mean, US is growing at 50%, and we are lagging behind with a growth in Europe of 30%. If you take that, and in shipping, yes, we have regulations have increased in the last 3 years about 30% more, I will say. And Draghi only mentioned it 65% in his report. I agree that we have a difficult point in Europe, and maybe the only solution will really be the defense. I agree with Professor Rogoff, because if we're going to spend the money, which we have to, from the Trump administration, it will be maybe a wise way to use it on harmonizing and modernizing the defense industry. What will mean is not about tanks and old equipment, it's about AI, robotics, aerial technology.
Right, a lot of this is dual-use technology that would also help.
Yes, and that can create a cluster. What happened exactly to the US? Basically, all the innovation in the US and the Navios and all these companies that come out from all this is basically the spending in defense, and I fully agree. And this is the silver lining that we as Europeans, we have to take it and see how we are doing. And I will say one more thing about Europe. I'm an optimist after all. I'm in shipping. We have seen that necessity is the mother of all invention. And I was having a bet with my team that Europe will never sign an agreement with Mercosur because we never have done anything, because it's all about our agricultural policy. And what we saw, all of a sudden, we saw an actual signing of an agreement, which means that Europe will have now, together with Mercosur, 750 million people. We are going to reduce the tariffs by 90% on the products that go there, and there is a great benefit because we need to find somewhere to sell our products. So I think that this is a positive part.
Hooray, no, free trade and an example of tariffs going in the other direction, at least for the time being. What's your take on this and on this question of where we can revive European competitiveness?
What I would add to what Angeliki said is that I think that it makes sense to spend this money in defense. But we can use this. We have seen what is happening with fires, for example, and you saw recently what happened in LA, and of course what has happened in Greece, in Spain. At least when you spend this money, instead of protecting your country from outside, you can protect it inside, and we all needed this because we cannot, let's say, be in 2025 and we see houses burn in the center of a town or things that we could never imagine, and you see people unprotected. That's one thing. And the second thing is that you can spend also this money for security within towns, within the country.
Within Europe.
Of course, within Europe. And the other thing, of course, that concerns us all is that with this immigration. I mean, let's face it, there is areas in the UK, there is areas in Belgium, there is areas in France that the European identity has been lost. And this is something that will be a problem that will be increasing, and we will face ourselves, our children, for the years to come. So we need to take radical steps. And of course, is all, you have seen it all these years, all this discussion about work, about immigration, that maybe is popular, but on the other hand, doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense for the real economy, doesn't make sense for the future of our children, doesn't make sense for our daily life. So someone has to be strong, a leader, to say that we stop all this and we need to do things that will be useful for society.
Well, there are lots of
If that's not popular or not,
in Europe.
I think that's a matter of time to be popular.
Okay, well, I mean, that's the direction that European politics does seem to be heading in. I wanted to ask both of you just some specific things about shipping. In particular, what is going on with the Red Sea? So the Houthis said recently, they made some statement that they were only going to target, I think, ships that were directly affiliated with Israel. But in practice, what's actually going on? Are you able to send things through the Red Sea in a way that you weren't 6 months ago, or is it, in effect, closed to a lot of traffic?
You know, we like the statement from the Houthis, but basically it's a terrorist group. Yeah. And, you know, if you see the statements, the liner companies, which is the major traffic through the Red Sea, they are not going to, I mean, you have the risk of life and the goods and the vessels. Nobody will pass through at this point.
So you are not sending ships through the Red Sea?
It may happen, but at this point you need to see some certainty on this. There will have to be a clarity, and it has to be passed sometime, because also the agreement between Israel and Hamas is very, you know, fresh, very recent. It's just a week. Is it going to be implemented? I mean, at the end of the story, the Houthis also, they have a system which they collect from whoever they like, about $2 billion. We saw it in The Economist. You know, companies that are in New York Stock Exchange, you cannot get involved in this. So
right.
Things that make sense if we see safety, and this is confirmed from our insurance providers and everything, of course you will go through.
Okay. Is that aligned with your experience?
I think that when they are terrorists, and you cannot have agreement with terrorists.
Right.
So I think that for everybody's interest, we need to avoid trading our vessels via Red Sea. And not to take unnecessary risk, and also all these insurance risk. I think that if ship owners be strong enough to insist of avoiding the passage, I think that it's up to us to make it happen. And for them, if they see that there is no target to hit, I think that this can stop sooner than later. But if there is a normal traffic and they can have easy targets, then they achieve what they want.
Yeah, it's hard to see how this one ends. Ken Rogoff, I'd like to come back to you and ask you about a completely different part of the world, which is Argentina. We had Javier Milei writing in The World Ahead about his rather radical economic reforms. They are quite striking, and it's a bit of a handbrake turn for an economy. I wondered what you thought of them, and I wondered whether, given sort of, France can't even raise the pension age slightly, what it would take to get sort of really radical changes to take place in Europe.
Well, we've seen this sort of radical reform a couple times. In Poland, we saw shock therapy. And Poland went through a lot, but it's now one of the best performing economies in Europe.
And Poland's the only economy not to go into recession in the global financial crisis.
It's a huge, huge success story. Then again, we saw shock therapy in Russia, and we got Putin. And so it's very risky. I will say that so far, he has surprised the skeptics. I can't reveal exactly where I had this conversation, but let's say among global financial leaders.
Where could it be?
Actually wasn't there.
It wasn't Davos.
It wasn't there, but recently. And just people are stunned. It's working. I even heard people who you would think hate him say, I love him. It's been infectious. Population likes him. He's popular. But it's been so hard in Argentina because the left is so destructive in Argentina, and you go back and forth between the left and the right. But, fingers crossed. Europe is not going to do what Argentina did. Europe moves by necessity, as everyone has said.
Well, so Christine Lagarde was quite optimistic last week that the crisis that Europe now faces is the kind of thing that will make it move. Do you think that's realistic?
Well, definitely on defense. I mean, if it doesn't move on defense,
then
we're going to be studying Russian. There's clearly going to have to move on defense, and that could lead to quite a defense is a big amount of spending.
Yeah.
And we don't want to miss the word harmonize that Angeliki said a few times, because the problem in Europe actually isn't just that it doesn't spend enough. It's that, the Italians want to have their battalion and the French want to have theirs.
It's like having 28 Pentagons.
It's like 28 Pentagons. It's incredibly inefficient, especially in a world where, you have these very big expense projects. So it could bring Europe together. You never know. It's that's clearly where the optimism is. But
sorry, did you want to come in?
Yes, I'll say one thing on the harmonizing. Think about that. Russia in 3 months makes all the ammunition that Europe, the entire European Union, does in a year. So harmonizing is the low-hanging fruit, and I agree totally with you that the big prize that we can get is when we really move to modernizing. That can be something that has happened in the US, where technology, robotics, AI can move to other industries. It has happened in Israel. It will be a mistake to lose that opportunity. This is the only silver lining I can see on this.
Well, that seems to be the formula. There's quite remarkable agreement, I think, that the best path forward for Europe would be, because the EU is already bending the rules on defence spending, right, by calling it stability funding, I believe, or cohesive, I don't know, there's some pot of money that they can unlock. And then if you had common defence procurement, and then if you got the Germans to change the rules on the debt brake, then you can see a way where a lot more money could go into this. And in Europe, one of the most striking stats in the Draghi report, although some of my colleagues say it's a bit higher, a bit too high, is 78% of EU defence spending happens outside the EU. Apparently it's closer to 60, but it's still an enormous, a more enormous chunk.
So you can go across a lot of areas in Europe where the same problem exists. Europe likes to have a hub and spoke system. The countries are the spoke. The hub is very tiny. It's the European Commission. There's some areas like the ECB, it's big. And the outer parts, the countries, don't want to give up power. So, for example, in pharmaceuticals, this is in the Draghi report, but I've heard it for years, you have to get everything approved at the national level, then at the EU level. In the banking system, you supposedly have a banking union in Europe, but you get really regulated by the national banks. Then you get regulated by the ECB. They don't want to let go of power. Germany actually, the German central bank, after the euro was formed, kept all its currency supply. They had all the Deutschmark in case they wanted to change their mind and pull out. So they're just areas, and none more so than defense, where you have to let go of this, and it hasn't happened.
I heard someone was saying a similar thing to me in Davos last week. I think it was the head of an energy company saying, you know, you just have to go through all of the same regulatory moves in every single country. The problem is, the answer to that is closer integration, more Europe, more power going to Brussels. Is that really going to happen under these circumstances? Can you really see people saying, actually, yes, we're going to let the centre call the shots? But that's a very hard scenario to take seriously, isn't it?
On some things, but maybe defense is
defense
just
can
the
lead the
thing
way?
where otherwise it's just a joke. And so that could be where it's different.
Because maybe it can be financed centrally. That can be a solution to that.
So if you finance it centrally, then you just decide it centrally. Okay, well, okay. Let's hope you're right, and I hope that if you're here again next year and we're having the World Ahead 2026, that we've seen some significant movement on this, because that sounds like the kind of the plausible path forward based on what you've all said. Thank you very much indeed to our panelists. Please join me in thanking Ken Rogoff, Angeliki Frangou, and Evangelos Marinakis.